Welcome to The Other Side of Medicine, a trusted source for education, not medication, for 35 years. In every episode of The Other Side of Medicine, we deliver health information your doctor won't tell you about. My guests are the nation's leading health experts in science-based natural medicine, physicians, authors, researchers, and clinicians. We believe natural medicine should be first, drugs and surgery last, and so we promise to deliver you the next generation of health information built on three principles: common sense, science, and cooperation with nature. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome aboard. I'm Dr. Krystosik. We're glad that you're with us tonight, and we're going to be diving into a topic tonight that is quite controversial. It's something that a lot of people are talking about in the nutrition world. There's some good things about what's happening with the new food pyramid, and there are some things that are quite concerning. We'll dive into those. But again, I think we really need to look at the big picture, because the big picture is not good right now. We are actually in a situation where people think that carbs are bad. You're being lied to. You're being lied to about saturated fat, and it's all over the internet. Carbs are bad, right? Saturated fat is good for you. That's what everybody, all the influencers are telling people. Eat more bacon, throw away your bread. And it's all becoming very trendy. It's on YouTube, it's on all social media, because with 6 million followers on some internet influencer, they say so, right? So it's got to be true. Well, Confucius say, I don't think so. This story doesn't have validity. And that's what we're going to be getting into. Today, we're going to follow the science, not the information about influencers who are really just trying to get more followers. That's, again, a dangerous position for them to be in, because they're really harming the long-term health of a lot of people. Now, people will get some benefit from going on these low-carb diets in the short run. But in the long run, there's so much evidence that it's deleterious to our health. And what you're about to hear may shock you, because you may have been told by these influencers that it's all good, And when the new food pyramid came out, there was a lot of these influencers got excited because there's a lot of hype and a lot of misunderstanding with that new food pyramid. It's a lot of confusion. Some people are celebrating because it sounds like the government has officially recommending saturated fat, more butter, more full-fat dairy products, and of course, more fatty red meat. Butter's back, right? Steak is healthy again. And isn't that what the average person wants to hear? It's been going on for a long time. For the longest time in history, it was only the rich who could afford the fatty foods, the steak and the pork and the beef and all those fatty foods. It was the poor people, the peasants, who weren't able to have those things. They had a paltry amount of those. And the kings and the queens and the rich, they had all that fatty food. And of course, we know that people back then, it was the people who were rich who were overweight and fat, when the peasant people were thin and trim and healthy. But, people got, like the kings got what's called the gout, which is the king's disease. Now, the problem is the narrative that we're hearing is completely backwards. Carbs are bad. Saturated fat is good for you. That narrative is absolutely backwards, especially if you want to reverse insulin resistance, which is a major problem. We have 65% of adults today have either insulin resistance, which is pre-diabetes, or they have diabetes. And it's getting worse. It's skyrocketing. And the experts predict it's going to get really bad. So if you want to improve your blood sugar, you want to protect your heart and live a long, healthy life, well, you don't want to go with the high saturated fat. Today, I'm going to show you why, not with my opinion. My opinion doesn't matter, but with human clinical research and physiology, biology, metabolic health is what's important. Let's begin with a simple question. You see, for thousands of years, what did the healthiest and longest living populations on Earth eat? Did the people in Okinawa eat ribeye steaks 3 times a day? Did the people in the rural areas of Italy drown their food in butter? Did the people in the blue zones, did they avoid rice and beans and potatoes and fruit? Well, absolutely not. The longest living populations in history, from Okinawa, from Sardinia, from Icaria, Greece, and Nicoya, Costa Rica, they consumed diets rich in vegetables and legumes and whole grains and beans and fruits. And they used olive oil as the primary fat. All these foods are what I call the carbs from heaven. They weren't carbophobic like people are today. They were junk food phobic. They didn't eat the junk foods. They weren't available. That's the big difference. Now, let's examine what's actually changed in the new dietary guidelines, the new messaging. The language is wrapped in comforting phrases like real food, stop fearing fat, and traditional eating patterns. Now, I got to tell you, there are some good things from my perspective that are in the new food pyramid. And like, for example, limiting the amount of refined carbohydrates, getting rid of sugar and artificial sweeteners. Those are good things. So let's applaud the government for doing that. But talking about saturated fat and steak is really healthy, and eating those saturated foods from butter and high saturated fat foods like that are actually good for you. Those oils are good, and beef tallow is good for you. On the surface, some of the things that they say inside of the new food pyramid, like I said, getting rid of the refined carbohydrates, eating more fresh fruits and vegetables, eating whole foods, those are good things. I agree with those. Ultra processed food is a disaster. It's really a really major risk factor for diabetes, heart disease, cancer, all those things. Refined sugar is a major problem. Artificial additives are also a problem. But here's where the guidelines really collapse. When you look at them under a microscope and really scrutinize them, buried deeper in that same report, far away from the headlines, the recommendation still states that saturated fat should be limited to no more than 10%. Now that's way down inside. It's kind of hidden down inside there. And so the average person is thinking that, oh, it's all good to eat the animal protein and the butter and the fats from cheese. See, you cannot promote full-fat dairy, red meat, butter, and animal fats as a routine staple and at the same time keep saturated fat under 10%. It's not really possible. Those two recommendations alone cannot exist in the real world. In the real world, they can't exist. Let's do the math just for a minute. Just hear me out. On a 2,000 calorie diet, 10% equals about 22 grams of saturated fat per day. 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 tablespoon, contains about 7 grams. A glass of whole milk contains about 5 grams. 1 serving of ground beef contains about 15 grams. That's already 27 grams before lunch. And we haven't even touched cheese or yogurt or eggs or the sauces that people eat. The contradiction, my friend, is obvious. But this isn't just about cholesterol numbers. It's about what saturated fat does inside your cells. Yeah. One of the clearest demonstrations comes from a controlled feeding study published in Diabetes Care, and back in 2018. Saturated fat, they found, more metabolically harmful for the human liver than unsaturated fat or even simple sugars. What a surprise. In this really tightly controlled study, the participants were overfed calories, and one group consumed excess saturated fat. Another group, they consumed unsaturated fat. Another group consumed simple carbohydrates like white bread and white rice and those type of really bad for you foods. But at the same time in this study, weight gain was similar across all the groups, but only the saturated fat group, developed significantly greater liver fat accumulation along with increased ceramide production. Now, what are ceramides? Well, they're bioactive compounds, lipid compounds, fat compounds that interfere with insulin signaling. See, insulin is the transport mechanism that gets sugar inside the cells of the body. But these ceramides, they block insulin's ability to suppress glucose production in the liver. In plain English, when saturated fat builds up inside the liver, insulin message stops releasing, that message to stop releasing glucose gets totally ignored. That's why fasting blood sugar rises. And that's why morning glucose becomes stubborn. And that's what we call hepatic insulin resistance. Insulin resistance coming from the liver. This isn't just a theory, it's cellular physiology. Now, another controlled human study published in the Diabetic Logging, like in 2001, they demonstrated that diets high in saturated fat reduce insulin sensitivity even when the body's weight remained stable. Well, that means you can disrupt insulin signaling without gaining weight. Now, think about that. Now, fat accumulation inside muscle and liver cells blocks the glucose getting transported inside the cells. So when someone says, I'm not gaining weight, so my diet must be good, the science says, nope, not right. Now, when insulin resistance develops in the liver, your body loses its ability to regulate glucose output overnight. And that's why people wake up with elevated fasting glucose, even if they didn't eat carbs before bed. See, the problem is not what they ate at dinner. The problem is the intercellular fat that's blocking insulin signaling at 3 a.m. in the morning. And yet the new guidelines elevate foods that promote exactly this kind of metabolic dysfunction, this metabolic, really outrageous function inside the body. Now, let's zoom out and examine cardiovascular disease, cardiovascular outcomes from this kind of problem. Now, there was a major study called the 7-country study led by Ansel Keys, and it was published back in the 1970s, with major findings summarized in 1980, followed by over 12,000 men across 7 countries. It clearly demonstrated a strong connection between saturated fat and coronary heart disease mortality, death from heart disease. See, Mediterranean populations consuming plant-based whole food carbohydrates. I'm talking about, whole grains like quinoa and brown rice and even whole wheat and the other whole grains like oats. Those kind of diets, whole food carbohydrate rich diets, had a dramatically lower incidence of heart disease rates in that study. Now, fast forward to 2013, and the other journal called the Pre-Dimmed trial, that was found in the New England Journal of Medicine, they actually followed over 7,000 high-risk individuals in this study. A Mediterranean diet that was rich in vegetables and fruits and legumes and beans and nuts and seeds and whole grains and olive oil, it reduced the heart disease events, the heart failures, the strokes by approximately a whopping 30%. Now, that is staggering. And in 2017, the American Heart Association published presidential advisories inside of the Circulation Journal, and the conclusion was clear. Replacing saturated fats with unsaturated fats significantly reduce heart disease. Now that's really science there. And in 2020, the Cochrane database actually published a massive meta-analysis, which a meta-analysis is multiple studies wrapped up into one. And they analyzed 15 different controlled studies with over 60,000 people. And reducing saturated fat resulted in 21% reduction in heart disease and heart failure and events. That's not opinion. That's a gold standard of evidence-based documentation of the dangers of too much saturated fat. Now, listen, if you want to eat animal protein, that's okay. That's your choice. But you're getting misled by the information. Now, even the people in the blue zones, they eat some animal protein, but they eat paltry amounts, small amounts. I'm not saying don't eat that food. If you choose to eat that, just be aware that too much of it is deleterious to your health. So when the influencers out there claim that saturated fat doesn't cause heart disease or cholesterol, doesn't matter, they're just totally ignoring just decades of research, controlled trials, and long-term outcome data. Now, yes, we all agree that refined carbohydrates are dangerous. They're harmful to our health. No question about it. White flour and white sugar, it's just terrible for you. It's not good at all. It just spikes blood sugar. It causes inflammation in the body. Those are what I call carbs from hell. I wrote a book back in 2003 called Carbs from Heaven and Carbs from Hell. It's a wrecking ball, a metabolic wrecking ball, those carbs. But that doesn't make saturated fats a health food. You see, the real tragedy is this. Over 100 million Americans already have insulin resistance or prediabetes. It's becoming epidemic. For them, saturated fat is not just something to be, taking nonchalantly. It worsens the hepatic insulin resistance I talked about earlier. It drives up the fasting blood glucose levels. It increases that ceramide production that I talked about earlier and elevates the risk for heart disease, heart attacks and strokes. Promoting high saturated fat intake in this population is a prescription for disaster. Now, let's be honest. Americans aren't dying because they ate too many lentils. That's a big joke. Americans eat very few lentils. They're dying because they eat ultra-processed food, refined sugar, the industrial seed oils, those hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils are absolutely devastating to the body. Overconsumption of processed foods across the board is bad. And of course, chronic stress and a sedentary lifestyle, very little exercise, again, that's a prescription for disaster. The solution is not replacing donuts with bacon. The solution is replacing junk food with real food, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds, olive oil. These foods, will help to make insulin sensitivity work properly. It'll be restored. And then the liver and muscle fat will go down. And that's what you want. Carbohydrates are not the problem. It's what we do to the carbohydrates. That's why individuals who reduce saturated fat and restore insulin signaling can eat the rice, the brown rice, and the beans, and the potatoes with the skins on. and fruit and watch their blood sugar improve. I've seen it in hundreds of my patients who had diabetes type 2 were actually cured in a matter of less than a month, some of them in a couple of weeks. And I've even seen type 1 diabetics reduce their insulin levels almost to nothing. And that's not because carbs are magic, but the reason is because insulin is finally working again. Now, the uncomfortable truth is that the dietary policy that we're being fed now has been built around population averages, not metabolic dysfunction. The guidelines may say limit saturated fat to 10%, but the messaging celebrates butter and steak. That's a real contradiction that confuses the public and benefits the industry who are making lots of money off of that, not the patients. Now ask yourself, who profits if you believe saturated fats are harmless? Who benefits if you say that? Who benefits if you stay confused? The food industry? The pharmaceutical industry? That's who. I'm telling you right now, it's not you. But you hold the power, my friend, to take charge of your health. Don't outsource your health to an influencer who's just chasing the clicks on the internet. Follow the science, follow the physiology, follow the biology, follow the data that's out there. There's thousands and thousands of research studies. Now, in the short term, yes, people get benefits from these low carb, high saturated fat diets. There's no question about it. When you get rid of all those refined carbohydrates, especially sugar, and you eat just fruits and you eat vegetables, and you limit the fruits and you eat more vegetables, and you get rid of all the refined carbohydrates and you just eat saturated fat and get rid of the bad oils, your body just says, thank you. Finally, you got rid of the junk. Now, in the short term, it gets a relief, but in the long term, it accumulates that saturated fat in the body and clogs up the arteries and causes a metabolic disaster. Yeah, don't do that. Follow the science of the longest living populations on the planet. Eat carbs from heaven, whole food, unprocessed, plant-based carbohydrates. If you're going to eat animal proteins, minimize it. Minimize it. Just like the people in the blue zones, they minimize the amount of animal protein, and those people are less than 1% of the population has chronic disease if they follow their traditional diet. Listen to what I just said. Less than 1% of the population of the blue zones have chronic disease. Do you know what the percentage of chronic disease here in our country is? Listen to this. It's astounding. 65% of people, adults specifically, 65% have one chronic disease. I'm talking about diabetes or inflammatory bowel diseases or problems with neurological problems, dementia, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and the list goes on and on. Heart disease and heart cancer and strokes, all those things. 65% of the population has one of those. A whopping 50% have two or more chronic diseases. Americans are walking around with a peck basket full of drugs in their medicine cabinets, and they haven't. Just doctors keep on prescribing more medications instead of getting people to live a healthy lifestyle, which includes eating a primarily plant-based diet, eating some cold water fish, limited amounts of saturated fat, exercising, having a proper mindset, stress management, getting proper sleep, at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night, having a good community surrounding you, family, friends, and community that support you. That's what it really takes. And that's what the people in the blue zones do. People have been eating the carbohydrates that are from heaven, the good carbohydrates, the whole food carbohydrates for thousands of years. Again, It's a prescription for disaster if you think of eating a lot of animal protein, a lot of saturated fat, whether it's from steaks or pork or the butter and the the beef tallow and all that. That's a prescription for disaster if you keep on eating that way. You can't have ease in the body when you can't have ease and dis-ease at the same time. So, my friends, you really need to pay attention to, again, what you're putting on your plate. Don't be duped by all this information that's coming from these influencers on the internet telling you that it's okay, it's good for you to eat a lot of saturated fat. They tell you that you've been lied to, that you've been told by doctors who are hiding the truth from you. My friends, there is so much research that proves that the problem is that we are eating way too much refined carbohydrates. I tell people the whiter the bread, the sooner you're dead. When you eat the refined carbohydrates, especially sugar, your insulin is just not going to help to get the sugar inside the blood. It's going to elevate those blood sugar levels, and you're going to be really at risk for diabetes and heart disease, cancer, and all kinds of other problems. So please, please be aware. Do your due diligence. Don't just listen to somebody on the internet, because a lot of people want to hear. They want to hear, yeah, saturated fat's good. I think of the people in the Old Testament in the Bible. And, God was taking the people in the Old Testament away from the bondage of Pharaoh. And, they were trapped. They were slaves to Pharaoh, and in Egypt. They were slaves. But Moses led the people out of Egypt and taking them to the promised land. And they were having some difficult times, but they were going to be freed from the bondage of slavery. And yet, what did the people of Israel say? They complained. They said, we want to go back to the flesh pots of Egypt. They wanted to go back to having all those foods that were available in that time for them, even though they were in slavery. They got their paltry portions of animal foods, but they wanted to go back to that. They had garlic and they had honey and they had, whole grains, and they were happy with that, but they were in slavery. They were in bondage. They wanted to go back to that. Don't be held in bondage to slavery of disease and the bondage of disease by following these internet influencers who are telling you that it's good to eat a lot of saturated fat. Again, that's a prescription for disaster. You really need to wake up to the reality that what people have been doing for thousands of years, again, as I mentioned earlier on, the poor people did not have a lot of money to purchase the rich foods that the kings and the people who were in control, they didn't have those foods available to them. They had to eat what came off the land that they had, and they had to sell the meats to the rich people. And they ate, again, simple foods. And when you look back at the blue zones and you look back at the countries who, not only the blue zones, there's a lot more. When they did the research on the blue zones, there was a lot of other countries that they could have actually taken the data from, but they had to be selective and to limit the amount of countries that ate the same way that so many cultures around the world have been eating for thousands of years. Again, mostly plant-based foods, paltry amounts of animal protein. And again, it's not just food. Don't be trapped in thinking like that either. There is just not a specific one particular food or foods that are going to help you to be able to have an independently healthy life, you have to have other things as well. And the people and the peasant people, they worked close to the land. They climbed hills. They walked wherever they went. They got a lot of exercise. They had good family relationships. They had stress, but they had minimal amounts. They didn't have computers and they didn't have TVs and they didn't have, bosses in corporations. They lived on the farm and they had family ties and close relationships with friends and community. And they got, good sleep because when it got dark, they had to go to sleep. They didn't have electricity. So they went to sleep and they woke up early and they worked outside and got fresh air and sunshine. All these things are important. Family, community, spirituality, all these things make a huge difference. So please study on your own and do your due diligence and look at the research. Again, people have been living on carbohydrates from heaven for thousands of years, and they've been lean and they've been fit, and they didn't have the kinds of diseases that we are having rampant in our country and our culture today. So we have, again, 65% of people who are overweight, and it's getting worse. So again, please do yourself a favor, do some research. I encourage you to follow me on my social media, on my YouTube channel, on Facebook, the podcast that I do every week, because I have on my podcast a lot of experts coming on here sharing the research, sharing the information with you that's science-based. And again, on my daily posts that I make on the internet, on YouTube, on Facebook, and the other things at Dr. James Krystosik social media, YouTube channel, I provide usually two different videos per day. And I try to make them entertaining because I think really we need to have more laughter. Laughter is good medicine. So I try to incorporate laughter so it doesn't make it just boring information. Just watch some of them. I think you'll find them quite entertaining. You'll have some chuckles. You'll get some information on how to stay healthy, how to stay mentally sharp, how to be able to get good sleep, how to have better digestion, how to reduce inflammatory conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel diseases, how to protect yourself from things like Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's and all those chronic diseases, including the number one killer, which is heart disease. You can also prevent cancers by eating plant-based foods because they have compounds inside of them that God has put inside those foods that act as medicines. They're very powerful plant compounds, bioflavonoids, phenolic compounds. These are really very potent antioxidants that help to make sure it protects against the free radicals from damaging the cells of your body. These are foods that are medicines and they heal the body. Now, they don't heal the body overnight. It's a slow progression of helping to restore your body to good health by eating those foods every single day. It's going to build up nutrition and provide those chemical compounds inside the foods, and it helps to assist the body to unlock the body's potential to heal itself. And that's what you want to do. So I encourage you also, by the way, join my Gut 911 prescription community. Right now, for the next 100 people, it's absolutely free. It's normally $49 a month. And inside that community, you will find free resources, books and courses, and all kinds of free tools and the support of people just like you who are trying to be healthy, maintain health, and to overcome chronic disease. Get the encouragement from the people, encouragement from me, support each other inside of a community of like-minded people, because you may be caught into a family or friends that are not at this time taking care of themselves properly, but you can join our community and be around people who will give you encouragement and support. So until next week here on this podcast, I would like to bid you a good day, a good evening, wherever you're watching. And until next time, I'm Dr. Krystosik. Here's to your health.